But still, it's hard for me to predict, like, who could have predicted Severance? Who could have predicted just Squid Game, the new shows that are coming out? Which leads directly into part two. Well, how can I say there won't be as many new good shows? Point two out of two here is the boom era of the streaming wars is over. That 2019 launch of Disney Plus for the next 2 years, all these companies making mega mergers to compete with Netflix to launch their own streaming platforms. So every few months you had Disney Plus launching, then Apple TV Plus launching, then Peacock and Paramount. That's over. Because last spring when Netflix hit the subscriber ceiling and started losing a few subscribers, everyone freaked out. That officially the era of throwing money at new projects and not being careful about it is over. The era of wild experimentation, or even just we're launching a new platform, we need a flagship show. That's done. I mean, think about how much of House of the Dragon Season 1 was being directly compared with Lord of the Rings Rings of Power at Amazon, which was in development for 4 or 5 years, and which they said, we want this to be our Game of Thrones. That's why it felt a little imitative, even though it wasn't going for an R rating in the same way. They pretty much openly said, we want our Game of Thrones. They wanted something big budget, really impressive, like that we aren't going to see as many huge launches like that again. That the money is tight now with the economy, simple fact that aren't new streaming launches. This is when they're merging, like Discovery and HBO Max. There will be a few big shows launching here. Now, I know Amazon wants to make a Fallout show. We'll see how good that is. But overall, there won't be as many new shows. Or they'll be less willing to experiment on something as kooky as Severance or Squid Game or something. So don't completely rule it out, but there won't be quite as many big new shows. You might see some of the old names who have ended, like the head writers of Succession might move on to something new. Vince Gilligan hasn't retired, he's moving on to other projects. We'll see what they make. So these 2 points combined, it's hard to predict new shows. I don't think there'll be quite as many big things directly challenging we're the next Game of Thrones, but when it comes to Emmy Awards like Succession and Severance, neither one of those was trying to be Game of Thrones. They're relatively easy to produce psychological thrillers or family dramas. I mean, they're expensive because the money is for these movie-level actors and quality writing. But the whole idea was going to be this visual spectacle, the scale will be epic. Even Netflix was trying to get in on this when they launched their Witcher series, which Season 1 got some buzz, and then everything happened to that is unfortunate. I feel sorry for the fans. But, outro, going out here, ending thought. If you were to ask me what was the next Game of Thrones, as soon as Game of Thrones ended in 2019, there was the constant buzz from the news, what's going to be the next Game of Thrones? Meaning what? You mean a show in that style, on that scale, or just something we buzz about that much? I mean, that the next Game of Thrones could have been anything from Mandalorian to Breaking Bad in terms of style. Like, Breaking Bad wasn't a giant epic. But if I had to pick one thing, that everyone wanted their own thing, that Netflix had Witcher, Amazon had Lord of the Rings, Amazon also has Wheel of Time, which Season 1 wasn't great, but they filmed during the pandemic, there were officially problems. See what they do in Season 2. There was a pandemic. We are reasonable people. We'll see what they do now that they've had time, and then land on them if they don't have excuses anymore, like a pandemic. Everyone wanted their Game of Thrones. Which one really succeeded? My answer is that as much as anyone did, it was Disney Plus, with actually two things. The combined Star Wars TV-verse and the combined Marvel TV-verse. I don't even think of them as separate shows. Like with Marvel, I think of it as one interconnected show with different story arcs. But if your measure is it's something that's become the pop cultural phenomenon that is dominating discussion, that is heavily downloaded, has high viewership, actually getting its foot in the door at Emmys, and which is fueling YouTube discussion and Twitter discussion. Just fandom is heavily discussing this. Star Wars and Marvel stuff. And I'm not a Star Wars and Marvel channel. I never will be. I'm not really trying to get into that. Better people who are more invested can do that. But consider that even when Star Wars is not great, like the Boba Fett show was experimental, it was throwing things at the wall, see what makes it stick. I enjoyed the ride. I like the actor. I'm happy he got a thing. We were still discussing Boba Fett. We were still making YouTube videos for it. Even if you think Mandalorian Season 3 is taking an odd turn, we're discussing it. And they're getting their foot in the door at Emmys. Mandalorian has managed to get a few writing nods, a few acting nods. WandaVision, Marvel tends not to because their shows are categorized as limited series. But that means they dominate the limited series category, not the full drama series. But critical acclaim, pop culture phenomenon, I honestly think that really took the place of that. And the poetry of that Game of Thrones Season 8 ended summer 2019, and that fall Mandalorian kicked off the Disney Plus era. So in terms of that, I think they're pretty much, that's the search for the next Game of Thrones is over. There isn't going to be a launch of another thing on the scale of The Witcher, or much less The Lord of the Rings. Maybe when they're doing new Lord of the Rings movies, that's more of a movie thing with WB. But Star Wars Marvel, caveat, I think that the very recent success of House of the Dragon Season 1 is just barely the World of Westeros franchise is starting to get its foot back in the door. And 3 years from now might be competing with, hey, are you watching the new Ahsoka season? No, I'm watching the new Duncan Egg show. It's great. Maybe. I see that these are the two clear things. HBO Max with World of Westeros, Disney Plus with both Star Wars and Marvel. Amazon has had a couple of tries, ups and downs. But that's pretty much where I think the 3 years in the wilderness since Game of Thrones have led us, and where we can look ahead into the new era. These 4 or 5 shows will be the dominant shows, unless we get a dark horse surprise from somewhere else.